The mansion was quiet, too quiet for the kind of wealth that usually demanded attention. Crystal chandeliers sparkled, but the air felt heavy, laden with tension. In the grand kitchen, a young black maid, Amara, was finishing her duties, her hands raw from scrubbing marble counters and polishing silverware. She had been careful all day, moving like a shadow so as not to disturb the delicate rhythm of the household. Little did she know, tonight would shatter everything she thought she knew about the family she served. It began innocuously, with the millionaire's wife, Helena, entering the kitchen, her heels clicking like ominous thunder. Amara felt the weight of her gaze before she saw her, and a knot tightened in her stomach. Helena's eyes were sharp, calculating, and they seemed to see everything Amara had done wrong before it even happened. The tension crackled like electricity. "Oh no, why is this uniform still clean?" Helena demanded, a cruel smile spreading across her face. Before Amara could respond, Helena lunged and tore at the crisp fabric, ripping the uniform in half. Amara froze, her chest tightening as the fabric fell to the floor in tatters. Time seemed to stop. She expected a scream, a slap, maybe even the order to leave immediately. But instead, there was silence. A silence that was almost more terrifying than the act itself. The other servants peeked from the corners of the kitchen, their faces pale, unsure if they should intervene or retreat. Helena's laughter echoed against the marble walls, but it was not a sound of joy. It was cruelty, carefully measured and delivered. Then came a sound that made everyone stop, the sharp, commanding footsteps of the millionaire himself, Richard, coming down the hallway. The very air seemed to shift when he entered the kitchen. Helena's smile faltered. She turned slowly, expecting a scolding herself. But what happened next stunned everyone. Richard's eyes were steady, unblinking, filled with a calm authority that made the room feel small. He looked at the torn uniform, at Amara standing frozen, and then at his wife. Not a word of anger was spoken, yet the tension that had gripped the room seemed to collapse in on itself. "I think you owe her an apology," Richard said quietly, his voice smooth but unyielding. Helena's lips parted in shock, unable to process the gentle yet unshakable command. Amara blinked, uncertain if she had imagined it. Richard stepped closer, not to intimidate, but to create a protective space around Amara. The maid's heart raced, the fear slowly giving way to relief she didn't know she was capable of feeling. In that moment, she realized that the man she served was not like his wife. There was a kindness in him, a principle that demanded respect for those under his roof. Richard handed Amara a clean, spare uniform from the closet and motioned for her to put it on. "You've done nothing wrong," he said. Helena stood frozen, realizing that her power had no place against his judgment. The staff looked on, mouths open, witnessing a rare form of justice, quiet, deliberate, and absolute. The torn uniform, once a symbol of humiliation, became a testament to the millionaire's moral compass, a line drawn between cruelty and decency. For the first time in weeks, Amara felt a warmth spread through her chest, a recognition that someone cared about her dignity. She had endured criticism, unfair blame, and silent scorn. Yet Richard's calm intervention showed her that respect could exist even in a house built on power and wealth. Helena, on the other hand, retreated to the parlor, her pride wounded, realizing that her actions had consequences she could no longer control. In the days that followed, the household dynamic shifted. Amara was no longer invisible. She was treated with the respect she had always deserved, quietly supported by Richard's consistent acknowledgement. Other servants found courage in his example, their own sense of self-worth rekindled. Helena, meanwhile, learned that wealth and status could not shield her from accountability, even within her own walls. Amara continued her duties with renewed confidence, carrying herself with a subtle dignity that had previously been suppressed. Richard often watched from a distance, never intruding, yet making it clear that he valued fairness above all else. The lesson of that evening, the power of silent intervention, the strength of standing up for what is right, resonated far beyond the kitchen. It became a story whispered among the staff, an example of how integrity could transform fear into respect. By the time the week ended, the mansion felt different. The air was lighter, the servants moved with purpose, and Amara held her head high. The torn uniform was gone, but the memory of that night, the moment cruelty was met with quiet justice, remained indelibly etched in everyone's mind. Richard had shown that true authority lies not in dominance, but in protection and fairness. The house had found TS balance again, and for Amara, the experience became a reminder that even in the darkest moments, respect and dignity could prevail. Days passed, but the atmosphere in the mansion continued to evolve. Amara's confidence grew with each task she completed, her quiet efficiency drawing subtle admiration from the staff. The kitchen, once a place of tension and whispered complaints, became a sanctuary where she could breathe, knowing that fairness and decency had returned to its core. Richard's presence, calm and unobtrusive, served as a constant reminder that justice could exist even in a house of wealth and power. Helena, meanwhile, could not shake the humiliation she had experienced. Her anger simmered beneath the surface, though she dared not confront Richard openly again. Slowly, she began to notice the respect Amara received, the quiet nods from other staff, and the way Richard listened attentively when Amara spoke. The realization that her cruelty had failed to impress anyone, and had in fact undermined her own position, was both infuriating and humbling. Amara continued to thrive, her skills in the kitchen and attention to detail catching the attention of guests and family members. Richard would often send her small gestures of appreciation, a note of thanks tucked into her apron, or a fresh batch of her favorite coffee waiting in the break room. These gestures, simple yet profound, built a bridge of trust and mutual respect between employer and employee that had previously seemed impossible. Helena's attempts to regain dominance were met with polite resistance from the staff, who had grown inspired by Richard's example. No one dared openly defy her, but subtle acts of independence emerged, a servant choosing to speak up about an issue, another quietly correcting a minor mistake without fear of reprisal. Helena realized that her authority was no longer absolute. Respect, she understood painfully, had to be earned, not demanded. Richard's interventions were always measured, never punitive. He believed in the transformative power of kindness, and his household began to reflect that philosophy. Amara's demeanor softened naturally, as she was no longer in constant fear of humiliation. Her work became more creative, more confident, reflecting not just skill but the pride of someone finally acknowledged for their efforts. One evening during a particularly busy dinner service, Helena attempted another act of subtle intimidation, criticizing Amara for a minor oversight. Richard noticed immediately, without raising his voice. He addressed Helena calmly, reminding her that respect was mutual and that belittling others reflected poorly on her character. Helena faltered, realizing that this confrontation was different from the one in the kitchen. Here she had no support, and Richard's quiet authority made her own voice seem small and insignificant. The staff watched closely, taking cues from Richard's measured approach. They learned that strength was not in fear, but in fairness. That true leadership was in protecting the vulnerable rather than dominating them. Amara felt an internal shift. She no longer hesitated to make decisions or voice concerns, her presence in the mansion now acknowledged and valued. Over time, Richard began involving Amara in planning aspects of the household that were previously reserved for Helena. Menus for guests, schedules for staff, and even small ceremonial details were now discussed with her input. Amara realized she had not only survived a moment of cruelty, but had earned a place of influence, a rare honor that made her heart swell with quiet pride. Helena, growing increasingly isolated, watched these changes with a mixture of resentment and realization. She began to see that her attempts to manipulate or dominate were not only ineffective, but damaging to her relationships within the household. Slowly, she learned to temper her impulses, though the road to humility would be long and uncertain. Amara's reputation spread beyond the mansion walls. Friends and family of the millionaire commented on her poise, efficiency, and the respect she commanded even in the face of past cruelty. Richard noticed the subtle admiration in their voices and smiled quietly to himself, knowing that his decision to protect her dignity had ripple effects far beyond the walls of his home. One day, a wealthy guest attending a charity event at the mansion asked Richard about Amara. "She runs this place," he said with a smile. Amara's cheeks flushed, but Richard's words were deliberate, acknowledging her work without exaggeration. The guest nodded appreciatively, understanding the implicit message: respect and fairness create loyalty, dedication, and excellence. Helena, increasingly aware of her diminished influence, attempted one last act of defiance, publicly correcting Amara in front of a visiting dignitary. Richard, ever calm, intervened silently, his mere presence a gentle but firm hand on Helena's shoulder caused her voice to falter. She realized that her position was no longer a tool of intimidation. It was meaningless without integrity behind it. Amara, sensing the tension, did not react with anger or fear. Instead, she stood straight, meeting Helena's gaze without a word. The dignitary, watching the exchange, nodded subtly, impressed by the balance of confidence and humility Amara displayed. It became clear that the power dynamic had irrevocably shifted. As weeks turned into months, the mansion transformed. The staff worked in harmony, the household running smoother than ever before. Guests remarked on the warmth and efficiency of the environment, oblivious to the struggles and triumphs that had quietly shaped it. Richard's quiet leadership and Amara's newfound confidence created a space where excellence thrived naturally. Helena, left to reflect on her actions, began to understand the value of kindness and measured authority. Slowly, though awkwardly, she attempted small gestures of reconciliation, a polite word, acknowledgement of Amara's contributions, even small acts of humility. Amara, wise in her patience, accepted these gestures without resentment, understanding that change takes time. The bond between Richard and Amara deepened. She no longer saw him merely as her employer, but as a mentor and protector. He, in turn, admired her resilience and grace under pressure. Together they cultivated an environment where fairness, respect, and dignity were not ideals but lived realities. A large gala held later that year celebrated not only Richard's success, but also the household staff's dedication. Amara, standing near the entrance, was warmly greeted by every guest, her name recognized and honored. She felt a sense of belonging she had never known, her confidence rooted not in fear but in respect and genuine acknowledgement. Helena, seated quietly in the corner, observed the admiration and attention Amara received. Though it stung, she began to grasp a fundamental lesson. Influence is not gained through fear, but through integrity and support. For the first time, she considered a new path for herself, one guided by respect rather than power. Richard, watching the interactions unfold, felt a quiet pride. He had not simply defended Amara from a moment of cruelty, he had reshaped the household's culture. Through patience, courage, and fairness, he demonstrated that true leadership uplifts rather than diminishes, a lesson that resonated far beyond the mansion walls. By the end of the year, the household had found balance. Amara moved through her days with calm authority, respected and appreciated. Helena had begun tentative steps toward self-reflection. And Richard, ever observant, continued to lead quietly, ensuring that dignity and respect remained at the heart of his home. The torn uniform, once a symbol of humiliation, had become a distant memory. A reminder that courage and integrity always prevail.